Everybody, thank you for joining digitally. Everybody that is here in Las Vegas at the Sandbox Impact Mansion, thank you for joining us here as well. We're going to go ahead and begin this after a little bit of issues with Zoom, but I'm sure that's going to be worked out during their IPO. But I want to also thank all of our guests on the panel. So first of all, Joe Toscano, thank you so much for joining. Joe, for those of you guys that don't know, was recently in the social dilemma about addictive technology and its unintended consequences. He was at Google. Before that, he wrote an amazing book called Automating Humanity. And he is now also, as of today, on Ahura AI's ethics review board. So thank you very much for joining.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
My very dear and personal friend, Brittany Kaiser, thank you so much for joining us on the panel. Brittany is absolutely brilliant. Many of us know her because she was the primary whistleblower for Cambridge Analytica that allowed everybody around the world to understand what's happening with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica and the Trump campaign. She wrote an incredible book that I highly recommend called Targeted. And I highly recommend you get the Audible version because she actually reads it to you herself. It's fantastic. Now she runs the Own Your Data Foundation and fights across a global stage to make sure people are able to own their own data and control their own destiny when it comes to that. Of course, Brittany, thank you so much as well for joining the Ahura AI Ethics Review Board as well about a month ago and being on this journey with us. You're amazing. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, guys.
And a last minute addition to this panel is another very dear friend of mine, Lauren Bissell. She at one point was a producer for Jay-Z. She throws events for the United Nations and at Windsor Castle, which is amazing. She is absolutely brilliant. And she actually just came on the advisory board for Neural Tunes, for which I am the chairman of the board. So thank you so much, Lauren, for joining us.
Thank you guys so much. Super excited to join. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm honored that I have so many brilliant, amazing friends, all three of you guys that constantly inspire me and teach me. And thank you all to the guests, all of you that joined us digitally, so many incredible and dear friends, investors, entrepreneurs, and global experts. So many people here at Sandbox Impact Mansion, those of you that both are part of the community as well as just joined us for the day. Thank you so much for coming. So we're going to get started here. The conversation that we're going to have today with our amazing panel is around ethics in artificial intelligence and data. And it's actually quite interesting because after we announced that we're going to have this panel conversation, a couple of really interesting things happened. The elephants in the room that we'll start off with after we have each person introduce themselves a little bit more and share a couple of their ideas. But there was a brouhaha at Google where one of their head or lead artificial intelligence and ethics researchers was either pushed out or resigned. There's a lot of information coming out. I'm not totally clear on all the information. I've been reading everything from MIT Technology Review as well as some other publications, Forbes and so forth, to understand what's happening. But there is a question around some of the ethical decisions that are being made around some of the data and some of the artificial intelligence they have. And then, of course, today, an article just came out where, and I think either Lauren or Brittany shared it with me, where the Attorney General of New York is officially suing Facebook, and 48 other attorneys general have signed on to the lawsuit to force Facebook to spin off Instagram and WhatsApp and some of their other business units because of monopolistic activities as well as unethical behavior when it comes to data. So I want to, with that as the context of what we're talking about, and given that we're at an age where data is the new oil, data is incredibly valuable, and what we do with it can move elections, it can move countries, it can cause death and devastation, it can cause inefficiencies in markets. I want to get your perspectives, not necessarily on the two things that just happened, but your perspectives on the impact of data and artificial intelligence on our world, and more importantly, the ethical responsibilities of corporations, of investors, and the population, and what your thoughts are. So whoever wants to begin can jump in.
Sure. I can start off. I mean, for me, it's more. There's a lot of details to it, but it's more of a big picture thing, right? I personally believe that data technologies, modern digital work has improved our lives more than it has damaged it. But there are just fundamental issues that we're digging through right now. We will tonight as well. That need to be changed, need to be focused on. It's a maturing industry, right? People feel like some of us are literally born into this and we don't know anything different. But many people around the world do not. And it is very much, as large as it is, still a maturing industry. So it's really just a discussion of how is it going to mature and who is going to lead that, I think.
Brittany, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I have spent so much of my life working with technology because I have always believed, and I still believe, that it is the most efficient and fastest way to create scalable, positive social impact. Unfortunately, what I discovered when getting deeper into the data science industry and finding more about how the data industry actually works, that unfortunately it's also scalable negative social impact when it is unregulated and when unethical executives are at the helm of companies that get to grow unchecked. So I really do see, like, the reason that I consider myself a data rights activist and the reason why I'm still a technologist despite being a whistleblower on the technology industry is because I still do believe that data science, artificial intelligence, robotics, these types of exponential and cutting edge technologies are going to be what solve most of the world's greatest problems. But in order to make sure that it solves more problems than it causes, we need to be working together to make sure that there are not just codes of ethics, but real laws and regulations that make sure that executives, entrepreneurs, investors are adhering to those ethics and that they are legally bound to adhere by those ethics. Because unfortunately, we have gone for too long without those regulations being in place. And even some of the new regulations that have come into place are unfortunately unenforceable, either because we don't have the regulators or legislators that have the technological understanding to write enforceable laws, which is why I spend so much time bringing technologists and legislators together so that we can make common sense laws that still allow ethical innovation, but protects consumers and citizens against bad actors. So what do I really think in terms of the responsibility? I mean, I think it's everyone's responsibility. It's consumers and citizens' responsibility to become more educated and to make better decisions in their daily lives, vote with their time, vote with their micro tasks, vote with the platforms they decide to use. It's important for legislators and regulators to have that serious technological understanding and to work with well-intentioned entrepreneurs to make sure that we can still have innovation that drives our economy, but we also can protect people from bad actors. And it's the responsibility of entrepreneurs and the builders and the investors and the people running technology companies and building these technologies to adhere to a serious code of ethics that makes sure that not only is there not a negative impact of their technology, but hopefully they are guided by ethical principles in a way where they are creating technologies that have a net positive effect on the world as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're definitely right on that. And Lauren, I'd love to hear your perspective as well. And if you want to add to that, what you think are not only the previous question I asked, but what are the dangers if we don't do anything and artificial intelligence and data run amok? What are the potential outcomes of that?
Sure. I mean, I have to say both Joe and Brittany, the points you made, I really agree with. I do think that where we are going with both AI and data and the combination of the two has the benefits outweigh the potential dangers for me as well. If we don't handle it correctly, I would say that the issues that have finally come to light, at least for the public, in the last couple of years in the data world will be tenfold if we're lucky now that AI is becoming more and more prevalent and something that the masses deal with, more complex AI, at least every day in their lives. So, obviously it's you've got everyone from, you know, someone like Elon Musk, who's going to sit here and tell you about the pieces of AI that could become super dangerous. And we've got, you know, these sort of like end of the world scenarios. But AI can compute things faster than we can. And that's only increasing every single day. And so if we're allowing this to get out of hand without putting regulation in place beforehand, we probably are somewhat doomed. You know, I don't want to run with the end of the world theme, but we have more responsibility to regulate AI up front than I think we even did with data. And education of the masses on that is the only way that we're going to be able to reach the people in power that actually can help make these regulations.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you're definitely right about that. And we've seen this actually happen in some countries, right? We know what China does with data and artificial intelligence. We were actually speaking about that a little bit earlier today. Do you want to share your thoughts on China, the social credit system, and the dangers of incorporating that kind of technology here?
Yeah, I mean, well, so I'll go along with kind of what we were talking about today, though, too, which is the thing I brought up to Brian. We were talking about the social credit score in China, the impact it's having on society, the concerns with it, but also maybe some benefits that may come with the synergies of one centralized system. The thing that I think we all have to ask ourselves is really, are we that far off in the United States, in Europe, and any other nation? Maybe we just don't have it so centralized, right? China is the Communist Party is the overarching owner of this, but we rate each other on.
Can I express?
Excuse me.
I just.
Oh, okay. Just like, yes, okay. But yeah, I mean, we rate our drivers on Uber. We rate our Instagram people. We rate Google Maps businesses, all of these, and it creates that same kind of hell for the right person. It's just not centrally owned by our government. So we really have to question with ourselves. It's like, because we have the freedom to innovate, we still have the freedom that the United States does. No matter how much anyone wants to say about like the Trump administration, we still have more freedom in the United States than many, many nations across the world. And so we have an opportunity to also shape where do we want that to be in the future? Because right now, whether you like it or not, we are where we are. And this is going to be what ends up defining where we end up, I believe.
That's a really valid point. And to piggyback off of that, we've seen what happens in industries when they fail to regulate their worst impulses, right? So we grew up seeing the battle with tobacco, where the tobacco industry hid and lied about the research that showed the externalities and the dangers their products cause. We've seen what happened with the oil companies that lied about all the research around climate change, and now that entire industry, their reputation is shot, and they're not doing terribly well. Well, at least not as well as they did in the past. So what I wonder about is, in the tech industry, are we going to wait for another 30 years for people to get really mad at us? Or is there a way to self-regulate, much like the medical industry has in the United States with the AMA? And Brittany, you are a trained lawyer. I'm curious your thoughts on this. Do you think it's possible for the technology industry or the artificial intelligence and data industry to find a way to self-regulate in a robust enough way to prevent the need for a heavy-handed, onerous set of regulations from our central government?
I wish. That would be great, but I haven't seen enough good examples to hope that could be true. Unfortunately, the structure of for-profit organizations means that everything that you do is designed to create profits, not designed to create social impact in a positive way. So that's really been one of the biggest problems in my legal dealings with large tech companies, mostly large. Some are SMEs, but mostly large, where unfortunately they have made continual decisions over and over that is just to drive profit for their shareholders. And it has nothing to do with protecting their users or providing anything positive for their users whatsoever. And therefore, I don't have the trust or the hope that groups or networks of for-profit organizations are going to be able to self-regulate, because that's not inherently the business impact or intention of the business in the first place. More and more, obviously, I'm hanging out with people like you guys who are all ethical technologists, who all are in the industry in order to do something positive for people. And so I am an eternal optimist, and I have hope for the future that there are going to be more ethical technologists than otherwise. I still believe that there are more people who go into technology because they want to make something new and exciting that will positively change the lives of people around them. They're not just getting into technology to try to make a lot of money. But unfortunately, a lot of the power and decision making, especially in the funding for lobbying, comes from fundamentally unethical big tech companies who have proven time and time and again that they cannot be trusted. And that is why I spend so much time writing laws, working with legislators and regulators, and taking with me the good examples of the good eggs, the amazing entrepreneurs and technologists who truly are doing the world a good service with what they're building, and make sure that legislators and regulators meet those people and hear directly from those people and spend time with those people, because I don't want the technology industries to be over-regulated. I really do believe that technology innovation is what is going to rebuild our broken economy right now. That's always been our best hope, even when we didn't have a broken economy. And so therefore, I don't want laws that are going to make it more difficult for good people to build good products. But that still, regulation, I think, has to be driven by a positive relationship between good technologists and the regulators. So it's never going to be just the companies, and it's never going to be just the government. It's going to be that open, transparent, and positive relationship between the people who are writing the laws and regulations and the people who are good examples of why the technology industry is something that should be allowed to flourish, right?
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right.
I think in addition, so going back to the conversation about China, right, and where are we headed? Are we going to go down towards China's path? I personally don't think we will. And it's kind of along the lines of what Brittany's talking about there. I think it's because there actually is, whether it's a clear or not, but there's actually a financial reason for us to do this, right? If we don't compete on quality innovation in the United States, we will lose to China because of pure quantitative metrics. If we try to turn the world into binary, if we try to run on data, China has way more data generators than we do. And the problem that they run into, though, is that if they can't get the rest of the world to adopt Chinese technologies, then they only have Chinese data. Whereas where we succeed right now, we have access to data of everything outside of China, right? So we have a diversity of a data set compared to that.
That's a pretty cool thing that this guy's making these videos about the vampire mining and stuff.
Good.
Yes, it is.
Absolutely. Right? I totally understand where you're coming from. I think you're right. That's part of the reason at Ahura, not to make a plug about what we're doing, but that's part of the reason that our biggest competitor is a company called Ahura AI. And they're huge in China. They got a lot of investment from the Chinese government, but they can't access American and European markets because of laws that prevent that and because of trust. And so it's one of the things that we do at Ahura is for every license that we sell to corporate entities, we give away free licenses to members of underserved communities globally, especially with a diversity lens in Africa, Southeast Asia, South America. What that does, not only does it make me feel warm and fuzzy that we're doing something great for the world and having an impact on a tremendous number of people, but it also gives us access, as you're mentioning, to data from all around the world. So we don't have these issues that actually Timnit wrote about in the research that she did, the ethical research on Google's work, where with a lot of facial recognition software, it doesn't quite work as well for women and African Americans, which means that the facial recognition software can and has had misdiagnoses that showed the wrong person. And so people could get arrested for that. There's a lot of other externalities that can happen. So I guess to keep on going and learn, I want to come back to you in a second. But on that note, you're on the steering committee at the World Economic Forum. Brittany, you're also involved in the World Economic Forum. You're on one of the committees on data and artificial intelligence. I know every time I've been at the World Economic Forum, there's been a lot of conversations. When I spoke there, there's been a lot of conversations around data and ethics and how we can do the right thing on a global stage. My friend Jim Clark runs the International Congress for the Ethical Use of Artificial Intelligence and Data with the United Nations. And of course, we know that OMIDR Network has a Race to the Top initiative. to create a framework so that artificial intelligence companies can get this validation that they've followed all these specific processes and systems and best practices. So I guess the question for you guys, with what your experiences, and Lauren, jump in as well on this, if these kind of organizations get a certain critical mass amongst technologists, CEOs, investors, and of course, the population, where people demand that companies with whom they do business engage in ethical artificial intelligence and data behavior, would it be possible to then not need this heavy-handed government regulation? Or is that an eventuality? Is that something that we just have to accept is going to happen and that we're going to fail to self-regulate?
It's actually something, you know, before you even asked the question, Brian, I kind of wanted to answer what you said before with another question. One of the things I love about Ahura AI is, I think this is what you guys are kind of getting onto, is, you know, I consider myself sort of a conscious capitalist. I think most people on this chat are probably familiar with that kind of term. But, you know, I love capitalism. I think that it is the reason that we have so many things in the United States that make me love being American. There's lots of things that are difficult about being an American or that I don't agree with, but that's one of the things that makes me really proud to be American. Now, do we handle that properly? You know, that's changing more and more. That's maybe another topic, but you know, when I look at how regulation comes together and how that's going to be implemented and what's going to happen to people if they don't follow it, why they don't follow it, I go back to human nature, human psychology, you know, and how we interact with each other. So the way that I like to create, and it's almost like creating a company, right? Like if you want to create a space where the people that live and work and play in that space want to follow the rules, if you will, or the regulation, it's either that they care a lot about the other people that they're interacting with, or they have an ethical, you know, thread and within themselves that they don't want to waver from, or it's simply good for them as well, right? So how do we play upon all three of these things? The first two seem like things we all know how to do, but how do we make practicing ethical data, use of data, profitable for companies as well? And I feel like that's a topic that people shy away from all the time because maybe it sounds like kind of like the wrong thing to say, but I think that's a very efficient way to do this. So how do we do that? How do we make regulations more profitable in the long run for large corporations and large companies so that we can continue to thrive, so that we don't stifle an industry? Like, how do we give people those tools so that they can run even faster? And that's kind of the puzzle I think we have to put together.
That's a fantastic question. Joe and Brittany, do you guys have an answer to that? Do you have a thought?
I'd love to jump in there, specifically because, you know, incentive structures are what change most behavior anyway. So you're talking about flipping incentive structures, Lauren, which you're exactly right about doing that. How do we make it good for companies? How do we incentivize companies to make the ethical decision? This is a conversation that I have all the time when people talk to me about, you know, transparency, consent, and remuneration for data. So data ownership structures in use of technology. And this is one of my kind of favorite conversations because I spent so many years in data science. And when you run data science projects all around the world, especially when you're working with governments, militaries, companies of all shapes and sizes, what you realize is the most expensive and arduous part of doing data science is the fact that you're purchasing and licensing data from all of these different places. And you're hiring these very expensive, sometimes PhD holding data scientists that cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars a year that are matching and hygiening data sets and are using machine learning and building suites of algorithms just to figure out, for instance, whether I'm a man or a woman because you've bought 10 data sets on me and 6 say I'm a woman, 4 say I'm a man. These types of issues within data science are only going to grow bigger and bigger. And it really is one of the most expensive parts of actually going through a proper data science process. So if we start with transparency and giving people ownership of their data, and instead of going through a process of purchasing and licensing all this data about me, going through a data hygiening process, and then having people build models in order to fill in the blanks, you could just ask me whether I'm a man or a woman. Oh, and while you're at it, you could ask me what's my favorite color and what I ate for breakfast this morning. And if I'm incentivized, then I'm very happy to share that information with you because you've acted ethically and I have a trust relationship with you. And then the company wins because you are saving so much time and money and you're having a direct relationship with the consumer. And for me, I think that is a massive incentive for companies to cut out so much of that process, save that time and money, and have a better B2C relationship. You know, I would love for people to prove me wrong. But I really think that the more we test that, the more we're going to see that that works.
I 100% agree. I mean, I'm very much capitalist driven in this. I believe in free market economy. I love being in conversations about regulation, but ultimately, like everyone on the call in the beginning, they're like, I haven't talked to you so long. I've been working. I'm just proving concept. That's what I'm about to do right now. I don't care. I'm working. And I think that's what we all need to do is build businesses that can compete with these models. I think I'm not concerned about Google, Facebook, all these whatever, being the leaders in 10 or 20 years, because I think we're seeing a shift from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. If we enter a world where we're paying people for their data, more people will be financially incentivized to participate in the economy with us. And it just won't even be, the value trade-off won't even be there for people to operate with a company like Google or Facebook or any of them. It will just be ridiculous. And that is what America is about. Ruthless capitalism, like do it the right way and move the economy and we'll change things.
And I'm glad you brought that up. So I'm curious about your thoughts on universal basic income, like my friend Andrew Yang promotes very heavily, versus the idea of universal earned income.
Yeah, are you looking at me to talk about this first? Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna pull in Brittany on this a little bit too, because actually I didn't even hear about. I knew the concept. Obviously, we've been talking about it for a long time, but I haven't really seen the universal earned income acronym, I guess, up until a couple weeks ago from Brittany. I was like, no, I don't like UBI. We shouldn't talk about that. And she's like, no, earned income. I was like, yeah, okay, I got you. That makes sense. But yeah, I mean, basic income, I fundamentally don't believe in it. Not because I don't believe that people should have money and the purpose behind it, the sentiment behind it, but because I don't believe the system. I think first of all, you're just giving money to anyone and everyone, regardless. Even the rich are getting it. Isn't that defeating the purpose? Like that's just completely uncreative, unthoughtful implementation of ways to allocate money. And I think that earning income is the actual appropriate way, because then we get to, first of all, we are forced to talk about defining a value to data. Second, as some of the conversations I'm starting to get into, we're going to be working on like tax proposals, which will then take the money that these companies have been looping around into other nations or not paying at all, and force them to bring that money back to America. And we can build infrastructure. We can use this for education. We can do all these things that will move us into the future. And we just, we need to make these moves.
Absolutely. And Brittany, you run the Own Your Data Foundation, and you've been talking about this for a very long time. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I just, there are so many different things that I could start with here, but, you know, firstly, for anyone on this call that hasn't heard this a million times, you know, data is now the world's most valuable asset. Something that you probably didn't think about, though, is that this is the only asset class in the world where the producers of that asset class have no rights to its value.
I could be a trillionaire if I had billions of people working for me for free.
So when you start to think of it that way, most other asset classes that have been valuable throughout all of history, in the beginning, they're exploited by, you know, a powerful, smaller class of people. And then eventually that gets overturned, and the producers of that asset class, or for instance, the owners of the land, if we're talking about, you know, drilling for oil or mining for precious metals, whatever it happens to be, eventually the owners or the producers end up getting compensated, and that ends up getting changed. And we look back in history in disdain, saying that that was a period of time where people were taken advantage of illegally, or it should have been illegal at the time and now we've made it illegal, right? So that's where we're going with the data industry. That over the past couple decades, most technology has been designed as kleptocratic, which is take as much value from everybody as possible and give people at the top. Now, that's not exactly the way that any other asset class works anymore, like literally none. So we are going to get some rights to our data. And the question is, how much rights are we going to get? That's the question, not whether we will get rights or not. So I work a lot with a concept called, fractionalized ownership, which people that work with blockchain and tokenization are probably quite familiar with, where you can have, say, I can perhaps own 30% of my data that I produce in Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg can own 70% of it. So every time he decides to monetize my data set, I'm getting 30% in compensation, and he's getting to keep 70 from his advertisers, or whatever it happens to be. That might be the model that starts to happen, but we will get some sort of rights over our personal data. Maybe our personally identifiable information, so the data that could be considered a part of what makes up our digital identity, we would get full ownership over that and never have to share that. But any of the other data sets that we're creating, especially when we're creating them in platforms that people have paid a lot of money and time to build, then yeah, we're going to only own the rights to a fraction of that cost, but we will still get what is now popularly referred to as a data dividend. You might have heard that from Andrew Yang. You might have heard that from Governor Gavin Newsom. Did I just freeze? Can you guys hear me?
Oh, we can hear you.
Okay, great. All of you guys froze for a second. So Governor Gavin Newsom wrote the first data dividend law, and Andrew Yang now has a group called the Data Dividend Project. And I'm working with these guys in order to, and many other legislators and entrepreneurs around the world, for people that are specifically working to build products and laws that allow the individuals who produce the data to own a portion of that data and therefore get a dividend or a commission or a tax, a portion of the value of that data back to themselves. And that's what we call a universal earned income, or it could be considered an earned income because you have earned it, because you have taken actions, whether it's micro tasks or whether it's just things you were going to do anyway, like walking around with your location data on, or searching or watching videos or filling out surveys, stuff you might have already done anyway. You are earning that by creating those data sets that are useful for people around the world. And what the big idea is, the 10,000-foot revolutionary plan is that we can all earn enough money off of our data that we could at least feed ourselves every day. And if that doesn't translate for you, that means curing extreme poverty. That means every single person around the world that has a device in their hand could earn enough money to at least buy groceries and not starve to death. In a year where we have the highest unemployment rates ever seen, and where we have broken systems around the world, like food supply chains, where we have the United Nations now saying that at least 150 million people are at risk of starving to death this year because of coronavirus shutdowns breaking these supply chains. It is our duty as technologists to take these ideas very seriously and know for sure that this is possible. If everyone, instead of using kleptocratic systems, was using something like a Clearphone, Brave browser, Sense Chat, like all of the stuff that pays you for the things that you already do and use every day, then guess what? You can definitely buy groceries off of that. And that's a reality already, let alone where we're going with projects like Rainfall and Clear Cellular and all of these new platforms that are really paying you for your time and data. This is a real possibility, and these are the things we should be working towards.
I'm glad that you brought that up, and I'm especially glad that you brought up Rainfall, because we've partnered, Ahura AI and also NeuralTunes has partnered with Rainfall. So when we collect over 10,000 biometric data points per user while they're using their data to learn significantly faster than traditional education, all of our users have full agency. It's an opt-in mechanism. They get to decide whether they sell their data and to whom they sell their data. And if they don't want to sell any of it, that's totally okay. And we've made a legally binding commitment, both from stage at the US Capitol in front of senators, representatives, and heads of agencies at the World Economic Forum and at the United Nations, that not only will we give them full agency over their decisions on which data they sell, but that they earn over 50% of that data, or of the revenue that is collected from the data. And right now, we're actually giving more than that. We're giving 70% just because we like to over deliver. So what that means is through Rainfall, through our partnership with them, we're able to generate over $200 of revenue per month per user. And when we give 70% back to the user, that's $140. Now, for a lot of us in this room, a lot of our viewers here, $140 isn't that much. It's a bottle of scotch. But for a lot of the folks in refugee camps that we provide Ahura to, for a lot of the folks in sub-Saharan Africa and Tanzania, Kenya, and South Africa, and Ghana, and Malaysia, and Brazil, and other places, in places where they're earning $5, $10, $20 a month, $140 can be fairly robust. And even if you take Americans who get, the ones that get minimum wage, $140 can, as you say, Brittany, make a very big difference on them being able to actually eat. So I want to pull Lauren into this conversation. It's been a while since you shared. I want to hear your perspective on what Joe and Brittany just shared.
Yeah, so I actually feel very strongly about, I also like to say universal earned income. Again, that's the conscious capitalist in me. But, you know, the humanitarian side of me loves the fact that I think that this can, it can end mass poverty, or it can at least help it. It can allow more people to eat, feed their families, feed their kids, and live better lives every day. The capitalist side of me loves it because it stimulates the economy. You know, if people have a little bit more to spend, there's less stress in their lives about survival, then you move into different priorities in life. That can also just kind of help stimulate you in different ways. I am a fan of sort of injecting that kind of power into people's lives, taking away some of their worry about survival and letting them grow and focus on other things. But you know, the one thing, and I've really struggled with this, because when I first thought about the idea of universal earned income, there was a piece of me that loved it, and there was a piece of me that really did not like it at all. And I didn't know if I personally was in a fair position to make that decision for the rest of the world, but just my own emotional and analytical response to it. You know, I don't see a way in which we could implement universal earned income without everybody having the same access to it. And this is something that Joe was talking about. Okay, so the wealthy still get access to this. That seems really strange, and it does seem strange. But where do you draw that line? Who is anyone to draw that line? There's certain places where we could do that, but I don't think that it works if not everyone has access to it. And I think it's okay that everyone has access to it, because that keeps, I'm just talking about the US right now, right? There are other countries where, you know, wealth distribution is very different. So that might be a different type of conversation. But in the United States, if everybody has access to this, it stimulates our economy. There's a clear line. There's no lines. There's a clear method that we use. There's a clear way in which it works. And nobody can say, well, this is a handout, or this is, you know, this isn't fair, because it's something that everyone has access to. And it doesn't increase tax. It doesn't put stress on a certain part of the population and not another. I think it's actually a pretty cool way to supercharge the economy over time. And that's why I like it.
I agree with you completely. So going back now with our conversation on universal earned income, as well as the conversation around the ethical use of artificial intelligence and data. And sometimes that means there's a choice you have to make where you're slightly less profitable in order to do the right thing. And of course, Media Network tried to create a paradigm where they essentially give a stamp of approval to organizations that are acting ethically, so that it's easier for investors and consumers and others to understand what's going on. So the question for all three of you, and any of you can answer, what do you think is the responsibility of investors when it comes to investing in companies and doing the due diligence to make sure that the companies in whom they invest are acting ethically when it comes to people's data and when they're using artificial intelligence? What do you think their responsibility is to make sure that they're doing the due diligence to make sure the level of security is high enough so folks' data isn't stolen, that they're using the best practices and so forth? I'm curious about all three of your thoughts on that.
Well, you two want to go first? I'm not as deep on the investment side, so I'll let you two go.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, I wish it was easier to answer those questions for yourself. If you're an investor and looking at a company, being able to tell what people are doing with data is next to impossible unless you can forensically analyze their database. And you have a team of PhD holding data scientists to tell you what the analysis actually even means in the first place. So it's really difficult to figure that out right now, which is why I'm such a big fan of a lot of emerging technologies that are coming out in the distributed ledger technology space, where you can, or, you know, especially when we're looking at smart contracting, we're actually able to audit that and you can see what the permission structures are in data systems, where you can actually tell, and then how a company is then able to prove that to people who are investors. You know, I've been doing a lot of work on standards, which I think would also be a much better tool for investors. Right now, there aren't really good cybersecurity standards or data protection standards that are out there. If it's not the law, then it's the Wild West, right? And unfortunately, in the United States, we don't have any federal legislation. So it's really difficult to say if what someone is doing is right, because there aren't those standards, and there are not laws either, where at least, you know, usually the law is supposed to set the standard, and unfortunately, we don't have that luxury. So there are some other countries that I think have done a lot better in this space. You know, for instance, the last amazing conference that I got to speak at before the world shut down was in Sweden. And the Swedish government actually has a cybersecurity certificate where companies can qualify for this certificate by proving that they have a certain level of standards in data protection and cybersecurity. And if you have this government certificate, boom, you get your company funded every single round. Boom, you have endless incoming leads for customers because you can prove that you are top class. And that's something that I've been working with a lot of legislators on in the United States, to actually say, like, either in a specific state or federally, if we finally get through the bills that will allow us to have a US data protection agency, but we at least are going to have a data protection agency for the state of California, because we got through CPRA or Prop 24, right? So we're going to start to be able to set those standards. I will likely be one of the people that is highly involved in that. And I'm really excited about it, because I think for the first time you can say, like, here are some of the things that you should actually be doing in order to be attractive for investors and customers and trustworthy. Here are the things that you should be doing. Because right now there might be industry best practices, but there isn't a handbook, there aren't laws and regulations, and there isn't an actual standards organization that is helping set these. So I really hope with the creation of the Data Protection Commission in the state of California that we'll start to see something good and helpful for companies and investors coming out of that.
I absolutely love that you're working on that. And I guess a corollary to that is, would it be helpful if you had tech executives and investors and consumers, if there was a heavy push from the population and from the stakeholders to put pressure on lawmakers to create the right legislation that isn't overly onerous, that doesn't go too far, but is the appropriate amount of regulation to create those standards? Would that help, or would that?
Oh yeah, it helps. I mean, definitely. Like, I've helped write or pass over 20 different laws in the past couple of years, and it's because I dragged technologists with me to hang out with legislators.
Well, you're also talking. We're all talking to a room full here, as well as quite a few people that are watching this video live, as well as others who will watch this down the road. So what would be your message to technologists and investors and family offices and others on what they can do, actionable items, things that they can do to put pressure, the right kind of pressure on governments to incorporate this kind of legislation?
If you have never reached out to your legislators before, now is the time. It is so easy. You can write them an email. You can leave them a voicemail. They're not in the office these days, so no one's even going to pick up. Leave them a voicemail and tell them what you care about. Say, I'm a technologist, I'm an entrepreneur, and I care about data protection. I'm a responsible entrepreneur, and I think that while we want increased transparency in this and that, if you overregulate me in these types of ways, it's going to be difficult for me to build my business. And tell them why. And now that Congress is all happening on Zoom, like congressional testimony happens on Zoom, you can sign up to testify in Congress just as a member of the public that actually has an opinion. You can do that most easily in state legislatures. Not all states constantly have legislative meetings, but you can reach out and say, hey, I'm really interested in this topic. When is the next time you guys are going to be discussing it publicly, and can I testify? It's not scary at all. It literally isn't, because trust me, you know more about the technology than any of the legislators. So it's more of like an educational thing, because they're talking about a specific law, and you can tell them more about how that technology works and why the law that they're possibly discussing passing is either good or bad for your company, and why you agree or disagree with it, and what changes they could make in it to better suit you so that you can grow your business, bring more jobs to either America or that particular state, pay your employees more, et cetera, and so forth. So it's just, I just so encourage everyone to get involved, because I feel like a lot of people building companies feel like the legislators are their enemy, or like they're naturally going to bump heads, which is just not true. Make them your friend, because they can learn from you and you can learn from them. And then in the end, everybody wins.
Cool. I also, and so obviously I'm not as deep in investing and whatnot, but I do believe there's a fundamental thing that can be brought to this, right? Which is a mindset that you're bringing to your investment, right? So I'm from Omaha. Warren Buffett famously is focused on only investing in companies that he would purchase the whole company if he could afford it. Right now he can, but I think that's something for us all to consider as well. Is like, you're not just like giving money to a place. Like, would you actually purchase this whole thing? Do you know it well enough? Do you trust it well enough? Like, you're gonna buy this whole thing if you could. And really think about that. You know, like Facebook was and still is in many ways a productive company for many people in their portfolio. And the thing that you have to ask yourselves is, now through research, we know that Facebook is doing damage to the world. Do I feel good about keeping my money in there? And not every company, there's no company's ever going to be perfect. Even these ethical companies are going to do bad things over the course of their tenure. The thing is, do they correct ship, right? You as an investor might not pull out when you hear the first headline. You might not pull out in the first 2 or 3 years of the headline. But maybe after 2 or 3 years of it and research validating it and the damage is being done, you say, I probably should move my money somewhere else. And I think that's just a fundamental mindset that everyone should take into the investing.
That's absolutely right.
I completely.
Go ahead, Lauren.
I was gonna say, I completely agree with what you just said. As an investor myself, you know, I'll share something just slightly personal that I kind of have like certain months out of the year that I concentrate on reallocating portfolio, you know, making certain types of investments, and that's when I'm like very open, like kind of on the investment prowl, right? Like, what's going on? Let's check in. And that's all I'm concentrated on. And I don't know why, but for some reason, at the end of this year, I have just had more offers of what were for me personally questionable investments that I had to sit back, and they were some of the most lucrative things that I could have brought into my space, into my new, you know, sort of portfolio. And it was just like, I can't do that. And it's not even that it was directly sort of wrong. It just wasn't the direction that I knew the world should go in. And like, that's something that I try to become more and more conscious about. And that's almost like, okay, I have to look at my investments. Of course, I want to, have investments that are extremely lucrative, of course. But is this building the world that I want to build? Like, we're intelligent enough that we can do both. We can have our cake and eat it too in that area. Like, put your capital and your resources into something that is going to make a better world, and be smart about it. That's what I would say your responsibility is as an investor. You find a way for it to be good for everybody. That's what makes you a good negotiator. And I think that's what makes you a good investor. And I don't think enough people, I think too many people let themselves get blinded by short-term financial gains, when they could probably make more in the long run and do something really incredible as well. I don't know why. Just we're humans, I guess. But
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think all three of you brought some very important points on. And it reminds me of one of the meetings at the World Economic Forum this last January that was run by Boston Consulting Group, and they invited several CEOs. One of them was the CEO of the largest private equity firm in Europe, and several others. And it was a discussion around a lot of the research that had just come up and that BCG had analyzed that showed that ESG companies outperformed traditional companies. And it surprised a lot of people, because oftentimes investors in the past looked at ESG companies almost as a part of their philanthropic work. And yet they found that from the data they collected, that ESG companies, because it was easier to find better employees, because their employees were more driven, more convicted on the work that they were doing, and because they had much longer retention for their employees, and their customers actually loved those companies much more, they were much more loyal, they wound up over the long term outperforming other traditional companies, which was, to me, really fascinating. And I think it reflects a turning point, a point of inflection in the world economy as we move forward. So I'm going to pass it to the three of you guys for final statements before we go into the Q&A session here, both digitally with everybody that's joined on Zoom, as well as our erstwhile guests here at Sandbox Impact Management. So who wants to give their final, concluding statements?
Sure. Well, I mean, I guess this was billed as specifically talking about ethics in artificial intelligence. And, that I really see this as one of the most important conversations that we could be having at, whether we realize it or not. Every single day we're producing exponentially more data. And every single day we get closer to our lives being run by smart cities infrastructure, Internet of Things, IoT, and every device that we have, or even household appliance. We get closer to AI and robotics making most of our decisions and taking a lot of our jobs. So as we go day by day, producing these exponential data sets, we need to think right now, what are we comfortable with? Because the problem is not going to get easier to solve. It is so incredibly important that we decide what we are comfortable with now, that we work together globally, not just state by state or country by country, but actually have global ethics that bond us through hopefully legal and regulatory implementation, but that really people that are building in this industry, if you are investing, if you are an executive, if you are a developer, an entrepreneur, whatever it happens to be, that we all take our individual responsibility for how big of a problem or a solution we could be building, because it's really one or the other, and the opportunity is ours to make or break.
Thank you. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think for me, the message is really just like, I personally believe there's no better time to be focused on stakeholder capitalism and technology efforts in those veins. I think it's really, for all of us involved, it's just time to hit the gas. Like there's a handful of people around the world who have been actively working for the last 5 to 10 years, some a little less than that, to help create regulations and to slow down some of these giants. Right now, there are massive nets cast over them that are dragging them down. I mean, that's the perfect time for everyone to hit the gas. Like, let's get ahead of the curve and out innovate them. This is the moment. So let's do it.
Beautiful. I love it. Lauren?
Yeah, I mean, I you know, final message and closing statement. I would just like to reiterate, especially to everyone on this call. I know we've got people in all different industries on this call, on this conference, but I would just like to reiterate how actually exciting the data industry is and how exciting AI is and tech in general. Like, as someone who came from the music industry, who, like, that's been my whole life, my whole career. I chose to move into this for a reason, and it's because it affects so many people, especially people that don't know that. And I would just encourage everyone here listening to remember that every single day. And I'm going to take this opportunity to plug Neural Tunes a little bit, because the reason I chose it is obviously, one, it's involved in something that I'm very passionate myself, how music can change the lives of as many people as possible. But I think it's an excellent use of AI and data coming together to improve the mental health of people using music. Like, of course I'm involved in this. So I just, you know, it's a sexy industry. I know that sounds crazy, but it really is. And I'm excited to be a part of it. So thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And just to piggyback on of that, we have Matt Gibson, the CEO of Neural Tunes, on the call as well. But what Neural Tunes does is it uses the underlying technology that we built at Ahura AI to identify the optimal music to play for human beings. So using music as medicine, they used some of the research that's come out over the past 18 years over at NIH about using music as medicine to replace a lot of the pharmaceuticals and be able to solve for PTSD for military personnel and police officers, and also solve for depression and clinical anxiety by playing the right music for the right person at the right time and using artificial intelligence to do that. So it's a brilliant company. And also, I have to plug Ahura AI. We invented technology that enables people to learn 3 to 5 times faster than traditional education. We use artificial intelligence to do this. And I will say this is the first of a series of conversations about important discussions in the tech space with incredible people like Lauren and Brittany and Joe, who are on the ground floor, having a huge impact on a global level. And we will continue to invite these global experts to speak to our community, to share their knowledge, to kind of expand on some of the conversations that we have over drinks or over water sometimes about the ways that technology can change the world. So thank you all for joining us. We're going to move into a Q&A session now. For any of you that have questions for either Brittany, Lauren, or Joe, and we also invite you to join us in our future sessions in this series of very interesting conversations. So I'm going to open it up. If you have any questions, I ask you to unmute yourself, and after you finish asking your question, please mute yourself again so that everybody can hear the answers. If you're here in the room, please go ahead and raise your hand if you have a question. If you are joining us digitally, please, there's a way that you can raise your hand to show that you have a question digitally. Or if it's easier for you, just use one of the emojis or just unmute yourself and I should be able to see that. So who wants to begin with the question?
Can we take a little water break real fast?
Why don't we do this? If I can ask everybody to grab a water, unless you need to use the restroom.
I need to use
Okay, cool. So go ahead. And we're going to do something else as well. So as the folks that are digitally joining us, as you begin asking questions, for anybody here at Sandbox Impact, we have surf and turf, we have filet mignon and lobster, as well as a number of sides that our amazing chef has prepared for us. What I ask is, as you get your food, please be cognizant of noise and be very quiet as you bring it. You're welcome to eat while we continue the Q&A. So why don't we start with some questions from the audience digitally? I see a couple people have already raised your hand. I will begin with Dekai, my brother, one of the top AI experts in the world. I'm so glad that you have joined us. What question do you have?
Hey, great to see you. Hey, Brian, great to see you again, Brittany. I think these, these issues have been getting brought up for quite a while, but I'm still concerned about the lack of concrete suggestions. There are, of course, in AI ethics now, hundreds of proposed guidelines for tech companies, but none of them are specific enough with respect to the use of personal data and misinformation, and that entire range. And I think one of the issues that 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 everybody sort of seems to be dancing around is that there is uh, really no great line between education and awareness raising on one hand versus malinformation and propaganda on the other end, right? To a large extent, it's a matter of your own perspective. Like, yeah, they're extreme, but in the middle, there's this huge area where one person's awareness raising and consciousness raising is another person's uh, malintended propaganda, and there's a lot of underlying bias. There's a lot of underlying in-group, out-group stuff going on, and this makes it really, really hard. We all agree we need to be having this conversation, but it makes it really, really hard to actually come up with any answer to this conversation. And I think there's major problems with the unintended consequences of this. We've been sort of stumbling forward, and we see, Twitter and Facebook belatedly, trying to catch up with labeling things that are in doubt. But the scale of the problem is moving much faster than the human attempts at remedying this. Now, as those of you who know me, in non-COVID times, I bounce, 1 week here in Hong Kong, where I am right now, and 1 week in Berkeley. And so I'm seeing up close constantly very, very different approaches to tackling these problems, because just across the border here, people cannot get on Facebook, and there's very strict controls over information. And so they're not dealing with kind of the fake news problem that's creating political chaos even right now, say with, I don't know what percentage of the population now, 30%, 40% thinks that the election was rigged, and was a fraud, right? How now, if we just take a step back and look at this globally, there's going to be a spectrum of countries on how much they attempt to control, for everything from outright falsehoods to things that are very doubtful, to things that have underlying malintent. And in some sense, that's a large experiment, but it's a very slow experiment to conduct. And if we keep on just sort of stumbling and hoping to band-aid our way into fixing this, and we compare how we do in the US versus how other countries, at the opposite end of across the border from me here in Hong Kong, are handling this, well, people say that data is the new oil. But in a democracy especially, clean data is the absolute essential clean oil to run. If you fill your car with oil that is corrupted with sugar and all kinds of other stuff, you know what happens to the engine immediately, right? And so we might be very conservative about how we want to regulate this, but we may very soon find ourselves trying to drive a car that somebody's dumped sugar into the gas tank of. Where is the concrete proposals to deal with that aren't just magical thinking that somehow hiring a few thousand humans to be checking posts when you're getting 1 billion posts a day is going to be able to keep up with the scale of the problem?
So how do you think we can solve that? I mean, I guess that's a question for both Brittany and Lauren, and Dekai, if you have ideas as well, but anybody? And you bring up very valid points.
Yeah. Now, it's a very complex question that you bring up, and I'm so glad you did, because You're right. I mean, this is now a slow moving experiment where we're trying all of these different things. But in my personal life, in terms of trying to make more privacy by design decisions, trying to use more ethical platforms, the most exciting thing that I have seen over the past couple months, in terms of preventing the spread of fake news and disinformation, happens to be using a social media platform where you have KYC AML identity checks. So every single person on the platform is a real person. The problem with Twitter and Facebook is that at least half the accounts are fake and run by trolls and bot farms, run by AI, unfortunately. And therefore, the spread of fake news and disinformation is exponential. Whereas if you are a real human being that is responsible for the content you put up, where you can personally be prosecuted if you are putting up content that breaks the law, then it's very unlikely that you're going to be putting up that content. So the biggest problem that we have in social media today, in my opinion, and many people will choose a different problem, but I think one of the biggest problems is that we are stuck between whether or not the platform is responsible or the individuals using the platform are responsible. And right now, neither are held responsible. So a platform cannot be held responsible, unfortunately, when we're talking about Section 230, and we'll see what the future of that looks like over the coming months and couple of years. But a platform, a social media platform, is not held responsible as a publisher is, as a real media outlet is. And individuals do not have to prove their identity in order to create an account. So therefore, if someone puts up content that breaks the law, and I don't mean just general propaganda, but I mean a lot of the information that we are dealing with, especially in election time, is slander and libel, is incitement of violence or racial hatred. It is voter suppression tactics. All of those things are against the law. We have laws against these things. But because they're being put up by fake accounts and the platform is also not responsible, it means that this just goes viral and there's no one is held responsible, no one at all. So it either has to be the platform or it has to be the individuals. And I think it's going to take a while before we can actually say that a platform could be responsible for all of this due to the current legislation, but also due to capacity issues of if you are going to have hundreds of millions or billions of users, can you actually hire hundreds of thousands of people for content moderation? What rules and standards are you using for content moderation? But if every individual is responsible for following the law just like they would be in person, you can't slander or libel someone, you can't incite violence upon someone, etc. and so forth. If you are held responsible for that with the content that you put up on social media because the company that gives you that social media platform knows exactly who you are and you will be held responsible, that's a completely different landscape. And I'm not saying this just because, you know, I like promoting voice.com, but try actually creating an account on Voice and seeing the reactions that you get from real human beings, not trolls and bots. It's one of those beautiful experiences I've ever had, given that I'm a rather controversial person. And the stuff that I say on social media, you know, rattles some people, right? And so I'm used to seeing all types of crazy stuff, but I'm also used to being attacked by bots and trolls, right? And when you put up really controversial stuff and the only people that see it are real human beings, it's actually a lot of intellectual critical thought as opposed to complete madness, right? And it's a really beautiful thing. So I really think that deciding liability is incredibly important. It's one piece that there's probably 1,000 things we need to do. But just in terms of my personal experiments, I found that to be completely revolutionary, actually.
I don't know what the question was, but I would like to add that I think on top of that, a big problem, sorry, I'm leaning into it, okay? I think another big problem is that there is an incredible financial incentive for people to create corrupted media and operations. Like this is the closest thing we've had to like a personal money printing machine since the conceptualization of a money printing machine. And there's no friction, there's no accountability. So why the hell not? Why the hell not? That's why I think we're having such a skew in the elections and all these impacts. I don't think it's Russian interference. I don't think it's solely Cambridge Analytica. I think it's a bunch of people who realize, geez, I can use this platform just like it's made to and basically print money, and I have no consequences.
Absolutely. Thank you for that amazing question, Dekai.
I want to concretize these issues as much as possible to try to get at how difficult it is to take these abstract principles, which I 100% agree with, Brittany, and actually get them to something that is operationalizable, right? Because there was this great example the other day in Arizona, right, where who was it that posted? I think it's one of the Arizona government people posted this thing about like, about the election having been stolen, and would you be willing to die to fight this right now?
That's insane, isn't it? It can't be legal.
What's that?
I do want to move on because Peter had his hand up for a while as well. Peter Kovacs, he was a mentor at Singularity University. He's a coach. Peter, you work with so many CEOs as a coach. You've been in the industry for a while as well. You had your hand up. What did you want to ask our panel?
Yeah, so as Bryan said, for those who don't know me, I'm an executive coach and I'm also a cross-cultural or intercultural expert. My question is around diversity. So I'm curious, how do you feel the diversity or the lack of diversity in AI teams, those who are developing, impacts both the question at hand today, but also the deployment of AI systems at large?
So who wants to answer that, guys?
Well, I'm just going to say something quickly that I think you guys might find really interesting, which is that I firsthand experienced in the 2016 election bias in the creation of AI, and you're probably not going to expect where I'm going to say that came from. Well, Hillary Clinton had a team of data scientists that were running her models that were all Americans that were Democrats and pro Hillary Clinton and have wanted Hillary Clinton to be president for all of time, et cetera, and so forth. And all their models said that Hillary Clinton was 98% going to become president. At Cambridge Analytica, we had a team of data scientists who were all foreign. None of them were Americans. Literally none of them, which is, not really legal, to be honest, but they were all foreigners and therefore saw the modeling as a science project, just as what it is. They were doing data science on a data set, and therefore they had pretty unbiased numbers that were coming out of their results and showing that Trump had at least a 30% likelihood of becoming president at minimum. And that went up day by day as we got closer to the election. And we were the only people that actually showed that Trump had a chance. I think that the closest numbers outside of ours said Hillary Clinton had a 92% chance of winning and Trump had 8%. And so if you're talking about, well-paid PhD holding data scientists running teams of people that are building these models, and they're getting these numbers that have nothing to do with reality. I mean, it's not only just the size of their data sets, they're not actually surveying enough people in order to have a real super sample, number one. But number two, they have all biased data scientists that are not diverse in their backgrounds, right? Whereas we had a diversity of people from all around the world who none of them were biased towards our client. No one was interested in Trump winning or not. They couldn't even vote in America. So they were just modeling the data and therefore could see more reality in the numbers. And so that was my biggest personal kind of reality with dealing with that, which is that the people who are modeling the data have such inherent bias. So of course, if we have all white dude teams building AI that governs the way the world works, then that's not going to work for women or minorities. That's all.
We've seen that over and over again in many companies, right?
Right. And so, I completely agree with, I'm so glad that you brought that up, Peter, just because I've had a personal, really intense experience with that I guess everyone else experienced that with almost feeling like the world was full of disinformation about what the electoral results were going to be in 2016, but it was because of the bias of data scientists that were not diverse enough in their reality, their backgrounds, and the way that they saw the world.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that.
Go ahead, Lauren.
I wanted to add to that quickly. You know, one of the things that I think is very important, which has obviously just been discussed a little bit, is clean data. You know, as was said before, data is the new oil, but clean data is clean data is the new clean oil. It's, you know, it's remarkable. So the thing that pulled me into this industry was, you know, very sort of quickly, but just on the surface, getting involved with Cambridge Analytica and being meant to build out their new music and entertainment vertical, and then all of that exploding. I learned so much in such a short period of time, and you know, especially from the entertainment industry, especially from sort of the media industry, it's one of the largest sort of places to collect data via the people that know the least about it. And that was one of the things that was such an opportunity there. But one of the reasons that you know, I'm now involved with Ahura AI and Neural Tunes, and recently started the Super PAC Independent America, is because we have access to clean data. It's regularly cleaned, and it's really hard to come by that. And so that's kind of something that, you know, just bringing this back very quickly to use of ethical data, which is obviously the topic of the panel. Having that responsibility in your hands is something where you kind of have to sit down and say, okay, what are we going to do with this? So knowing the value of what you have and then knowing how to use that correctly is still just something I want to push forward really, really intensely.
That's amazing. Thank you both of you for those amazing amazing answers. And Peter, thank you for the amazing question. We have a couple more questions on deck right now. We're going to go with Arun, and then Bill Kimberlin, you are on deck. So Arun, I'll just turn the video on you here. So Arun just joined the, here we go. So, whoop, there we go. Arun just joined the Sandbox Impact community. He is a serial entrepreneur who's had a lot of success with building companies. So Arun, you want to ask your question?
Yes. So my question relates to globalization of data. So up till now, the conversation has been primarily around the US and US regulation, but data is not specific to a country, it's global. Most companies are both selling globally and accessing data globally. So one of the major economic powers, the EU, passed GDPR. And so my question was, when this happened, my company, along with many others, became compliant with GDPR because we need to sell in Europe. So even without the US doing anything, GDPR had a huge effect on US companies. What do you as the panelists think of GDPR as a first step towards data protection? And should the US be using that as a model and extending something similar in the US? What do you think of GDPR?
That's a great question, thank you.
Let me think. I got it. All right. I think in general, it's a great conversation starter. I'm really happy that it sparked a bigger conversation about the need for data protection. How do we operationalize these things? It forced us to have a conversation that there was no financial incentives to before, right? However, I also believe the law is, for the majority, unenforceable and broken. When it got established, as you just said, it forced you to make changes. You're lucky you can afford to do that, right? A lot of people can't. Maybe you couldn't even, as a company, maybe you're like, oh crap, we can't afford this, but we have to do it, right? It creates a really big struggle to continue to innovate for small companies. And then for bigger companies, in many ways, it regulated their practices and protected them. You know, so like, and then beyond that, when they laid this down, the whole internet was illegal, basically. And so the European Union is struggling to process, like, where do we even start? Because everyone is not compliant, pretty much, you know? So I think kind of the conversation we've been having tonight is realistically, we need technologists more in that conversation, which is what Brittany and I and many others are doing. It's because we need to help the legislators understand this. It's not that the legislators are stupid. It's that you got to consider they're legislating for everything happening in the economy, and this is a new field, like relative to history, and so they're just learning. It's part of the process. That's also why I'm very fundamentally focused on the changing of markets through capitalistic pursuits rather than regulation. But I do hope that we have some fundamental guardrails put up here in the United States. But I also hope that we prepare legislation that is less constricting than the GDPR is, so that we can set, as America does many times, a role model for how legislation should actually put into place.
So for those of us who aren't experts in this field, can you give a brief summary of GDPR and what it says? It might be a big explanation, but a short one would be great.
Sure. Yeah, I'll try, and you two can chime in as you feel fit. It's essentially, in many people's minds, like the first realistic data protection law in the world. It sets regulations around how data can be processed, how it can be collected, for what use purposes, who has access, all those things. At a high level, it's a good step conceptually towards a more protected internet. I just think there's
So does it have penalties for companies that fail to comply?
Big ones.
right. Yeah.
Lauren, Brittany, you guys have anything to add there?
Maybe some more detail. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, GDPR was the first kind of like the supranational legislation around the world that really started to go into the fundamentals of data protection and privacy and give people those rights. The rights to transparency first. So what data is being collected about you. You now have the right to request a full copy of all of the data that is being held on you. Once you have that, you can then revoke consent to be marketed to. You can say, even if you have my data, you're no longer allowed to use it. And then you can also request the right to delete. So that, in terms of data rights, was absolutely revolutionary. Next, in terms of the ways that data is used, past your rights, which is in Europe, you are pre-opted out. So in order to collect anyone's data, you need to get them to opt in. So it means that you are told what data is going to be collected from you and what it's going to be used for, and you opt in for a particular purpose. Now, purpose limitation is one of the most important components of data protection law, which means that if data is collected from you for a specific purpose, then it cannot be used for another purpose. And that's very particular to GDPR. It was something that was already the case in countries like Germany and France, but not all over Europe. In order to kind of land the plane on the importance of purpose limitation, for instance, let me bring up a law that Joe and I helped write earlier this year, which we helped write the first ever coronavirus contact tracing data protection law. And this law, for instance, talks about purpose limitation, where if your data is collected for the purposes of public health, then it then cannot, for instance, be shared with law enforcement for targeting peaceful protesters, right? And we use anti-discrimination clauses, et cetera, and so forth. So that concept comes from GDPR and is so incredibly important, especially when you think about the way the data industry works, where most countries around the world, if an organization collects your data, whether it be public or private, they can then sell that data on to millions of companies around the world who are doing anything with it, and you don't have any consent, transparency, or rights to what it then is used for, right? And so GDPR was the first really to make those moves, and also to allow something called a subject access request, which is how you exercise your rights. You can complain directly to a company or a government department and ask for that copy of your data, for that opt-in or opt-out, for the right to delete. And if a company or organization does not respond to you within a month, then your complaint goes to the Information Commissioner's Office, or the ICO, and then there's government regulation and enforcement. So the idea that you can go to an organization first and have a company or government deal with you directly is also quite great. And it's not like the company is going to be automatically regulated or punished, but they have an opportunity, a window of time to actually do the right thing and to let you exercise your rights. So in many ways, GDPR like started the real revolution in data rights by securing that for tens of millions of people. And now we have to fix all of the fundamental flaws that are in GDPR, where it's very difficult to actually implement. And I don't think that's going to be a thing of better legislation. I think it's going to be cutting edge technology that actually allows it to be easier to be compliant, and where you can do automatic audits, and smart contracting where you actually know permission structures and can immediately revoke access, et cetera, and so forth. It's a technology solution, not law, but GDPR got our foot in the door of actually using technology ethically.
Yeah.
When your company complies with GDPR, do you guys comply for all customers no matter where they're domiciled, or you're only complying with the European domicile customers?
So there's what we did and there's what other companies did. What we did is we complied universally because we don't sell the data anyway. So we were not financially incentivized to try to break the market to handle the data differently. Other companies, Facebook, Google, other companies where the data is incredibly valuable, only complied in European markets. So they split it because they want that data.
Yes. Thank you so much for that question. I'm going to jump to Bill Kimberlin in mind, and then you can ask a question after. So Bill, you have had your hands raised. Bill has been an institution in San Francisco for over 2 decades, a serial entrepreneur, and also helped found SVBS. So Bill, what question do you have?
Thank you. Yeah, most of you know me from SVBS. If not, then you know me from Burning Man. One or the other. So we're talking about the size of this problem here, and I'm just curious what you guys might think if part of the problem could be solved. What if there was like a trust score, a credibility score, to where when you were reading a piece of content and you literally had a tool to where you could, it's just like, call it like your own credit system for borrowing money. You've got a low credit score, you've got a high credit score. But what if there was a way to instantly know if that article was credible or trustworthy or not? And for those of us in blockchain here know that there's something called anonymous consent. And so let's say, assume that score was coming from anonymous consent of people that are third-party vetted, peer-reviewed, like scientific articles, legal articles, things like that. It's not going to solve all the problem, but a big part of the problem as far as policy and things like that. If there was a credibility score, how would you use it? Do you think that would be part of solving the problem?
Brittany, you want to take this first? Since,
Oh yeah, I mean, if we could do that, I think that would solve a lot of problems, and that's really where the beginning of the intention comes from on Twitter and Facebook when they flag something as possibly false content. They say, hey, this claim has been proven false, right? And so that's only that's one source of credibility. But usually when something's been flagged as it's been proved false, it's because enough people have reported it and given the reason why. And that's why that flag comes up. So it is kind of usually crowdsourced intelligence, not something that's just coming from the platform. Although right now we don't have any way of proving that, given that Twitter and Facebook can make their own decisions about what they want to censor and flag. So the idea that we can use distributed ledger technology, we can use more trustless technologies to say that people around the world would be able to verify the veracity of some of these pieces of content, is like, that's definitely the holy grail, because I think that's definitely where things are going. But we also need to make sure that this is happening in an environment where that system cannot be gamed, where someone's not putting up a piece of content and then all of a sudden there's a million bots that vote for it as true. And then all of a sudden everyone thinks it's true. So unfortunately that system, has has all of the opportunity in the world to solve kind of the fake news and disinformation problem, but we have to solve the troll, bot farm, fake accounts problem first before a system like that would ever work. But
if that problem was solved,
yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's a problem that we can solve. I think eventually people are going to get tired of using platforms where half of everything that they see is fake. And most people are going to get tired of less than 50 cents of every dollar they spend on advertising actually being shown to real people.
I think it also,
Can I just say something, because this is exactly the problem that I work on in the research side. The danger here is the unintended consequences, and there's a couple. One is that the implementations of this typically look at credibility through the lens of popularity rather than actual critical thinking science, empirical fact. And this is a fundamental issue that we've had going back all the way to when search engines, I don't know if you remember old school search engines before Google, Alta Vista, etc. When search was based on analyzing the propositional content of things, and then Google came along and flattened all of those people by using PageRank, which is a popularity-based metric.
right?
And we have substituted popularity and influencers for the much less sexy, hard work of doing the empirical evidence-based, logically consistent, and statistically valid reasoning. And I think until we come to grips with that and formalize that in legislation, we're going to continue to build echo chambers that are full of popularity, as opposed to, and this is happening domestically as well as geopolitically, and that carries enormous geopolitical risks, because we're seeing that happen where the same dynamics we see in the U.S. right now, we as Americans see that very clearly now, but even now we don't see that all of America and Western Europe are in one echo chamber and not understanding what's actually going on in, say, China, Hong Kong, where the story is far more complicated than that. And if we implemented one of these metrics that are based on credibility right now, the entire West would converge upon one popular, massive oversimplification of East Asian dynamics. And that's extremely dangerous. That's the sort of thing that predated World War II and World War I and leads to massive Cold Wars.
That's why we're having populism movements. Yeah, I mean, it literally is. So let's go back to the question of, can we solve this? I guess define solved, right? I personally don't believe we ever will solve it. I'm a much bigger believer in teaching critical thinking skills. But as an experienced designer, I also understand how big of an uphill battle that is in the reverse direction. So I think it's critical that we develop this kind of score and think about it over time and continue to iterate. But will we solve it? Will it ever be like, hey, we solved the problem? I don't think it will be. I think we'll perpetually be chasing a moving target. And that's both good and bad. It's good in the sense that we will flex to the moment in history, the cultures we're reacting to, all these different variables, but also can become bad because then if we were to define these scores right now and say Facebook were to roll it out or Twitter were to roll it out, there is a good 46% of the population or so that would assume instantly that this is fake and that it's not valid, right? That's the ultimate point of your score, correct? So
yeah. I want to wrap up my question if I can, and just the last thing I'll say is that there is something like this that exists. I moved to Silicon Valley 4 years ago looking for a technical partner and ended up acquiring an AI company in Palo Alto last year. And we are releasing our first product that's trust as a service. And essentially it is that credibility score. And I would love anybody that would like to see it live. I'll put my email into the chat thing, but I am looking for people to start looking. I am not an AI person. My partner is a research scientist, But what I am is I'm a product guy, and I moved there looking for a product that I could take to market because my background is doing customer acquisition programs. So, and I'm very passionate about misinformation and disinformation. I've got, this is where I'm focused, but unfortunately, what I learned quickly from the investors in San Francisco was that, people didn't really want us to focus on the consumer problem with that yet. So we kind of started focusing on enterprise first, but my passion is on the consumer side, and that's also my background. So if anybody shares a mutual interest in that, please reach out to me. I would love to
Thank you very much, Bill. So thank you, Bill, for your question and your comments. We are going to transition to the final stage of this event. And so here at Sandbox Impact, whenever we have these kind of events, after we do the official event with the digital components, we then shut off all the recordings, we shut off all the digital components, and we have an off-the-record conversation so that our panelists can speak completely off the record as well. So obviously, everybody that's joined us digitally, you're welcome to join us physically in the future when we throw these other events. We throw them fairly regularly. We COVID test everybody that comes in the door to make sure we have a very safe environment. But thank you all for joining us. Let's hear it for, I know Brittany had to leave because she had something she had to run to, but thank you to Brittany Kaiser, to Lauren Bissell, and to Joe Toscano. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to everyone that joined us in person and digitally. We're looking forward to continuing the conversation with you moving forward.